The wound wasn't what nearly killed me. It was the 3 days after. I've told this story only twice in my life. Once to a priest in Guthrie, who I was fairly certain wasn't listening, and once to my horse Gerald, who was. I'm telling it now because enough time has passed that I can say it plainly, without the particular shame a man feels when he admits that someone saved his life, and he didn't even think to ask her name before. She was gone. It was April of 1874. I was 34 years old and had been trailing cattle up from the Texas Panhandle for the better part of 6 weeks when the ambush happened outside of what would later become known as the Cherokee Outlet, in the rolling grass country, where the territory bled into itself, and nobody was entirely sure whose land they were standing on. 3 men, 1 rifle. I killed one of them and rode hard for 11 miles before I understood that the bullet in my left side was not going to wait for me to find a Dr. Harlan's trading post was the first structure I'd seen in 2 days that wasn't a rock formation. I rode through the gate slumped over the saddle horn and would have hit the dirt in the yard if someone hadn't caught me. That someone was the first thing I noticed, even half conscious. The hands were small, but the grip was iron, and the voice that told me to stop moving and let her look at the wound was calm the way a river is calm when you don't know what's running underneath it. I stopped moving. That was the beginning. Harlan's trading post had been operating for 11 years in 1874, a rough-built structure of cottonwood logs and salvaged lumber that sat at the crossing of 2 routes, one used by freight wagons heading north, one used by Cherokee traders coming west from the nation. It was the kind of place that existed because geography demanded it, close enough to nowhere that stopping was necessary, far enough from anywhere that questions were impolite. Harlan himself was a man of few words and fewer principles, though he ran an honest scale and didn't water his whiskey, which passed for virtue in that country. He had been operating in the territory for 20 years and had, along the way, developed the particular frontier philosophy that the most valuable thing in any man's establishment was someone who could talk to everyone who came through the door. Sarah had been his translator for 3 years. I didn't learn that immediately. What I learned immediately was that she was pulling a bullet out of my left side with a pair of iron forceps that had been heated in a fire and cooled in a water bucket, and that she was talking to me in a low, even voice the entire time. Not comforting nonsense, not prayers, but actual information. What she was doing, what would happen next, what I needed to do and what I needed to stop doing. "The bullet is intact," she said. "That's the only good news. The rest is going to be unpleasant, so I'd recommend biting down on this." She handed me a leather strap. I bit down on it. She was not wrong about unpleasant. I ran a fever for 2 days. I know this in the abstract way. You know things that happen to you while you were not fully present for them. What I know more concretely is that when the fever broke on the second morning, she was sitting in the chair beside the cot with a book open on her knee, and she did not look up immediately, which told me she had heard me wake up but was giving me a moment to come back to myself before she had to deal with me. That was a consideration most people don't think to offer. I noticed it. "You're going to want water," she said, still not looking up. "It's on the table to your right." I reached for it, drank, set it back. "How long?" I said. 2 days. "Your fever broke about an hour ago." I looked at the ceiling of the trading post. The wood was dark with smoke from 20 years of fires, and someone had carved initials into one of the beams. HP 63, and below it, in smaller letters, a symbol I didn't recognize. "That's mine," she said, following my gaze. I was 14. Harlan let me put it there. I looked at her. It was the first time I'd been conscious enough to look at her properly. She was younger than I'd expected. No older than 25, I thought, though I would learn later I was off by 4 years in the wrong direction. She had the kind of face that is easy to underestimate at first and impossible to forget afterward. Sharp black eyes, a quality of attention in them that made you feel she was reading something you hadn't meant to say out loud? "What's your name?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't read. "Sarah," she said. "What's yours, Thomas?" "Thomas Calloway." She nodded once as if filing it away. "Well, Thomas Calloway," she said, "you've lost a significant amount of blood, and you have no business riding for at least another 4 days. After that, I'd suggest keeping west and north, and avoiding the stretch of road where you got yourself shot, because those men won't be feeling charitable." She closed her book and stood up. "There's broth on the stove. I'd start with that." She walked out. I lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of the trading post coming to life around me. Harlan's boots on the board floor, the creak of the front door, voices in 2 languages mixing and sorting themselves out, and thought that I had never in my life felt simultaneously so weak and so entirely, inexplicably calm. She spoke 4 languages. I found this out not from her but from Harlan, who told me on the 3rd morning while she was outside dealing with a freight delivery. English, Cherokee, Creek, and enough Spanish to argue prices, he said, refilling my coffee without being asked. He'd been doing that since I'd been able to sit up, which I had come to understand was his primary expression of goodwill. Her father was Cherokee Nation educated. Her mother was Creek. She grew up speaking both and learned English from her father's books before she ever met a white man who spoke it. He said this with a mild pride. The way a man talks about a good piece of land he had sense enough not to sell. "Why is she here?" I asked. "Working for you." He looked at me. "You'd better ask her that yourself," he said, "and I'd advise you not to phrase it the way you just did." I thought about that. How should I phrase it? He refilled his own coffee. "With more humility than you're probably accustomed to," he said, and went back to his counter. I didn't ask her that day. I wasn't sure I'd earned the right to yet. What we talked about those last 2 days was everything and nothing. The weather, the territory, whether the creek crossing 2 miles north would hold through spring, which she thought it would, and I doubted. She had opinions and offered them without apology, which I had been raised to find startling in a woman, and instead found, without entirely meaning to, refreshing. She asked me about the cattle work, not with polite curiosity, but with specific questions. Where we'd come from, what the grass had been like south of the Canadian River, whether the trail bosses were pushing the herds harder now that the railroad was creeping closer. She knew things I hadn't expected her to know, and I said so. She looked at me with that expression again, the one that filed things away. "My father subscribed to 3 newspapers," she said. "I've been reading since I was 6. She paused. "You thought I wouldn't know about the railroad?" I didn't say anything. She almost smiled. "Thomas," she said, "you should work on your face." "I am working on my face," I said. She did smile then, briefly and entirely genuine. The kind of smile that arrives before the person decides to allow it. And then she looked back at the book she was reading, and I looked at the wall, and the trading post was very quiet. I thought about that smile for a long time afterward, longer than was reasonable. She was gone when I woke on the 5th morning, not gone from the room, gone from the trading post entirely. Her chair was empty, her shawl was missing from the hook by the door, and Harlan, when I came to the counter, was cutting leather with the particular focused attention of a man who has decided not to notice that you're about to ask him something. "Where is she?" I said. He kept cutting. "She goes when she goes," he said. "Had business in the nation. When will she be back?" He looked up at me. He had the eyes of a man who had watched a lot of people want things they weren't going to get. "Hard to say," he said. I stood at the counter. Outside, the territory was doing what it did in April, the wind moving through the grass in long silver waves, the sky a hard, indifferent blue. I paid Harlan for the room and the doctoring and the 5 days of coffee. The bill came to $2.40. He charged me nothing for the surgery itself, which he said wasn't his to charge for. I left $3 on the counter. Then I rode north. I told myself I was simply heading where the work was. The cattle, the trail, the next contract, the next season. The work was always there, and it was always sufficient, and it was what a man like me did with his time. And that was a complete and satisfying account of my life. I believed it for approximately 11 miles. Then I stopped believing it and kept riding anyway, because there was nothing else to do. The 2 years that followed were the kind that look productive from the outside. I took 3 more cattle contracts. I built a modest reputation for getting herds through difficult country without significant losses. I saved enough to make a down payment on a small spread of land in the Northern Territory, which I registered with the county office in October of 1875 and then left sitting empty while I kept moving. The land cost me $40. Under the rules of the Homestead Act, I'd need to improve it and work it for 5 years to prove the claim. I was aware that I was not doing that. I told myself I'd get around to it. I told myself a lot of things. What I did not tell myself, at least not directly, was that I had been circling the same general geography for 2 years. That the cattle contracts I took consistently brought me within a day's ride of Harlan's trading post. That I had passed through that crossing 6 times and stopped 4 times. Each time talking to Harlan about everything except what I had come to ask about. The 5th time I stopped, it was December of 1875, and Harlan put 2 cups of coffee on the counter without being asked and looked at me for a long time. "She's not here," he said. "I know. You've been riding past my door for 2 years. Thomas, I have business in the territory." He drank his coffee. "You know," he said finally, "there are men who go looking for someone because they feel they owe them something. That's a clean thing. Easy to finish." I looked at my cup. "And then there are men," he said, "who go looking because something happened to them when they weren't paying attention, and they don't know what to do with it. And they figure if they can just find the person again, they can either sort it out or let it go." He picked up his coffee. "You strike me as the second kind." I didn't say anything. "She's staying with her cousin's family east of Tahlequah," he said. "She was there when I last had word, 2 months ago." He reached under the counter and produced a folded piece of paper. "That's the road." I looked at the paper. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because you've been making me watch you not ask for 2 years," he said, "and it's getting tiresome." He went back to the counter. "And because she asked me once if you'd come back through." I picked up the paper. "What did you tell her?" He picked up his leather cutter. "I told her you'd come back through 6 times already," he said, "and I'd wager on a 7th. The road east of Tahlequah ran through country I hadn't seen before. Older country, green and folded, more water than I was used to, the bare December trees making a lattice of the sky. The Cherokee Nation sat differently than the open territory I'd been working. There was a weight to it, the particular gravity of a place that had been someone's home for longer than most records go back. I found the property at mid-morning on the 2nd day. A small house, well built, smoke coming from the chimney, 2 horses in a near paddock. I stopped at the gate and sat on my horse and held the paper Harlan had given me and thought about the very real possibility that I had ridden 3 days to make a fool of myself in front of someone who had moved on entirely and remembered me, if at all, as a difficult patient who asked too many questions. The door opened. She stood on the step with a shawl around her shoulders, burgundy wool, different from the one she'd had before, and looked at me across the gate with an expression I could not read, which I had come to understand was simply how her face worked, right up until the moment it didn't. "Thomas Calloway," she said. "Sierra," I said. A pause. "You look better than the last time I saw you," she said. "I was unconscious the last time you saw me. You look considerably better than that," she said. There was a dry note in her voice, that humor of hers. "Come inside. It's cold." I tied my horse. I walked to the door. She stood aside to let me in. The house was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something cooking and books. There were books everywhere. stacked and shelved and piled, more books than I had seen in any private home in the territory. Your father's? I said mine, she said. He left them to me. She gestured to a chair at the kitchen table. I sat. She put a cup of coffee in front of me. I looked at the coffee. I thought about what Harlan had said, about the two kinds of men, and about which kind I was, and about whether it mattered now. I owe you my life, I said. She sat across from me with her own cup. That's not why you came, she said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. She looked at me with those sharp black eyes, the ones that read the thing you hadn't meant to say out loud. Then why? She said. I looked at my coffee. Then I looked up at her and said the true thing plainly, the way I had been rehearsing it for 2 years, and the way it came out, sounding nothing like the rehearsal, because those 3 days were the first time in longer than I can tell you that I felt like a man someone thought was worth the trouble, I said, and I didn't know what to do with that. So I kept moving. He paused. And then I couldn't stop moving because I kept moving toward you. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the December wind moved through the bare trees. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I asked about you. After you left, I know. Harlan told me. She looked at the table. When you didn't come back, I thought I'd misread you. You didn't. I said. Another pause. I know what it is to be between worlds, she said finally. And it was not a complaint, but a statement of fact, offered with the same precision she'd used, telling me about the bullet. I am Cherokee and Creek, and educated in English, and none of those things is the whole of me. Most people want to put me in one of them. She looked at me. You never tried to do that. I didn't know enough to try, I said honestly. She almost smiled. That's the most accurate thing you've said. I looked at her across the kitchen table. This woman who had saved my life and disappeared and been the fixed point I'd been orbiting for 2 years without having the honesty to say so. I have land, I said. North Territory, 40 acres I haven't done anything with yet. I registered it 18 months ago and I've been leaving it empty. She looked at me. I'd like to do something with it, I said. I'd like to build something. And I'd like to know. He stopped. Started again. I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean, Sarah. I came 3 days to say this. I'd like to come calling on you properly, if you'll permit it. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a horse shifted in the paddock. The fire moved in the grate. The weight of all the books in the room held the silence down like a hand on a table. You know what people will say, she said. I know, I said. They will say it loudly. She said, persistently. I imagine they will. Does that trouble you? I thought about it honestly. Less than riding back without asking, I said. She looked at me for a long time, with that expression that filed things away. Then she picked up her coffee. My cousin's family will expect you to stay for supper, she said. Ruth makes an exceptional venison stew, and she will have an opinion about you that she will share without hesitation. I understand. Clara, that's her daughter, will ask you approximately 40 questions. I'll do my best. She looked at the table. She was quiet for one more moment. Then she said, you can come calling Thomas Calloway. She paused. You should have come sooner. I know, I said. I was thinking it through. She looked up. There was a warmth in her face that hadn't been there before, or that had been there, and I was only now close enough to see it. You think very slowly, she said. I think carefully, I said. She smiled. The real one. The one that arrived before she decided to allow it. Come to supper, she said, and we'll see what you're made of. The spring after that first visit, I broke ground on the 40 acres. She came to see it in April, riding across the territory with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing it her whole life. She stood at the edge of the land and looked at it the way you look at a thing. You're deciding whether to trust. What will you plant? She said. I said, whatever grows here best. I'd want your opinion on that. She looked at the soil. She crouched down and took a handful of it and felt it between her fingers and stood back up. Creek bottomland, she said. It'll hold water well. You could run cattle on the upper ground and put a kitchen garden in the lower. She brushed the dirt from her hands. If you build the house facing east, you'll have good light in the mornings. I looked at the land. I looked at her. I'll build it facing east, I said. She nodded, as if this were simply a practical decision about orientation and light, which it was, and also something more, which she knew and I knew, and neither of us needed to say. We were married in the summer of 1877, in a ceremony that pleased nobody entirely, which Sarah said was probably a sign that it was honest. Her cousin Ruth cried. Harlan rode 40 miles to attend and brought a bottle of good whiskey and a practical handshake. The Reverend was brief and sincere, which was what we had asked for. She brought her books. I built her a shelf the second week, measured to fit the volumes she already had, using the good cedar from the timber I'd cut on the North Ridge. She ran her hand along the shelf and looked at me. You measured it for the books, she said. I knew which ones you had, I said. She was quiet for a moment. That is, she said finally, the most considerate thing anyone has ever done for me. It's a shelf, I said. Thomas, she said patiently. It is not a shelf. I went back to my coffee, but I understood what she meant. Not the wood, not the cedar, not the joints fitted careful and true, but the fact of being known. The fact of someone paying close enough attention to the details of your life that they can build something designed exactly for you, before you ask. That's what love looks like when it doesn't announce itself. It just quietly faces the right direction. The creek that ran through the north edge of the property flooded in the spring of 1879. She was at the fence line with me the next morning, her sleeves rolled up, her braid pinned out of the way, working with the unhurried competence she brought to everything. I watched her work and thought about April of 1874, about the hands that had caught me falling from my horse, and the voice that had told me to stop moving and let her look. You know, I said, I never thanked you. Properly. She kept working. You came 3 days on a December road, she said. I counted that. That wasn't a thank you. That was something else. She looked at me. Yes, she said. It was. The creek moved past us. The territory was green in the spring morning, somewhere to the east, toward Tahlequah, and the nation, and all the country she carried in her, and all the country I was still learning. A hawk turned in the wide sky. She handed me the fence post she'd been holding. Hold this, she said. I held it. She drove the post into the ground with 3 clean strikes and moved to the next one. I watched her work and understood. Standing there on the land we'd built together, on the wrong side of every line anyone had tried to draw between us, that some things cannot be repaid. They can only be lived up to, and that, I told myself, driving the next post beside her in the spring morning light, was something I intended to spend a very long time doing.